I watched her sign the divorce papers with the same pen she'd used that morning to save someone else's marriage. That's the moment I knew this story was going to destroy me. Because Dr. Patricia Henderson, the woman who'd saved 10,000 marriages, couldn't save her own. And what I discovered about why that happened, well, it's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and the price we pay for helping others. Listen, I need you to understand something right now. This isn't just another story about a therapist with problems. This is about what happens when you spend 20 years holding everyone else's pain, and nobody, not one single person, thinks to ask if you're drowning. 3 months ago, I became Dr. Henderson's assistant, and I thought I was walking into a dream job. Fancy office in downtown Seattle, leather chairs, those fancy degrees on the wall, you know the type. She had this reputation, right? The marriage whisperer. Couples would fly in from different states just to sit on her couch for 1 hour. 1 hour with Patricia Henderson could save a marriage that 5 other therapists had given up on. But here's what nobody tells you about people who save others for a living. They're not superheroes. They're just really good at hiding their own bleeding. My first week, I noticed something weird. Dr. Henderson had this habit of staying late, like really late. I'm talking 2, 3 in the morning sometimes. I'd leave at 6 and she'd still be there, and I'd come back at 8 the next morning and I swear she was wearing the same clothes. At first I thought, okay, dedicated professional, right? Woman's committed to her work. But then I started paying attention to the little things. The way her hands shook when she thought nobody was watching. How she'd sit in her car in the parking garage for 30 minutes before going home. The fact that her husband never, not once, called her during work hours. His name was David. David Henderson. And the first time I met him, I thought he was perfect. Showed up at the office one Tuesday with flowers, kissed her on the cheek, asked about her day. He was a corporate lawyer, good-looking guy, always wore these expensive suits. They'd been married for 18 years. 18 years. And from the outside, they looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine about successful couples. But you know what I learned working for a marriage counselor? The couples who look the most perfect are usually the ones bleeding out the fastest. It started small. I'd be filing paperwork and I'd hear sessions through the walls. Not the words, just the emotion. And Dr. Henderson had this gift, this absolutely supernatural ability to make people feel heard. She'd say things like, "Tell me what that felt like for you," or "I can see how much pain you're carrying," and grown men would break down crying. Women who'd been holding rage for decades would finally let it out. She had this way of creating safety, you know? Like her office was this sacred space where you could finally stop pretending. But here's the thing that started eating at me. After every session, after she'd just spent 60 minutes holding someone else's marriage together, she'd sit at her desk and stare at her phone. Just stare at it. And I realized she was waiting for a text that never came. From David. Her own husband. I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine spending your entire day teaching people how to communicate, how to show up for each other, how to choose love even when it's hard. And then you go home to someone who hasn't really looked at you in 3 years. Someone who's there but not there. Present but absent. You know that kind of loneliness? The kind where you're sharing a bed with someone and you've never felt more alone in your life? That was Patricia Henderson's reality. And nobody knew. Not her clients, not her colleagues, not even her best friend. Because she was too good at her job. Too good at holding space for everyone else's pain to let anyone see her own. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays were her longest days. Back-to-back sessions from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. This particular Wednesday, she had the Mitchells at 9. The Mitchells were a mess, 22 years married, he'd had an affair, she'd shut down completely, they had 3 kids caught in the middle. Classic case of betrayal trauma, and I'd seen Dr. Henderson work miracles with cases like this before. She sat with Mrs. Mitchell for the first 30 minutes, just her alone, and I could hear Mrs. Mitchell sobbing through the door. That deep, guttural crying that comes from somewhere ancient. And Dr. Henderson, she just held that space, told her that her pain was valid, that betrayal rewires your brain, that she wasn't crazy for feeling shattered. Then Mr. Mitchell came in and she facilitated this conversation between them that was so raw, so honest, that even I got emotional listening from my desk. By the end of that session, the Mitchells were holding hands. Actually holding hands and looking at each other like maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back. Mrs. Mitchell hugged Dr. Henderson at the door and said, "You saved my life today, you saved our family." And Dr. Henderson smiled, that professional, warm smile she was so good at, and said, "You saved yourselves, I just held the flashlight." But the second that door closed, her smile disappeared. Just vanished. And she walked to the bathroom and I heard her crying. Not soft crying. The kind of crying where you can't breathe right. The kind that sounds like something inside you is breaking in real time. I didn't know what to do. Do you go check on your boss when she's having a breakdown? Do you pretend you didn't hear? I stood there like an idiot for probably 5 minutes before I knocked softly and asked if she was okay. She came out with perfect makeup, not a single sign she'd just been falling apart, and said, "I'm fine, just a difficult session." But her hands were still shaking. That night, she didn't go home until almost midnight. And I know because I stayed. I made up some excuse about organizing files, but really, I was worried. We ended up talking, like really talking, around 11:30. She ordered Chinese food, we sat in her office with the lights dimmed, and for the first time, the mask came off. She told me about David. How they'd met in graduate school, how he'd been supportive at first, proud even. But as her practice grew, as she became more successful, something shifted. He started making little comments about how she cared more about her clients than him. How she was never really present at home. How she'd turned into this emotional version of a surgeon, cutting into other people's relationships but ignoring her own. And the worst part, the part that was killing her, is that he wasn't entirely wrong. Dr. Henderson looked at me that night with these exhausted eyes and said something I'll never forget. She said, "I teach people how to ask for what they need, but I've forgotten how to do it myself. I spend 8 hours a day telling people that their needs matter, that they deserve to be heard, that love requires showing up. And then I go home to a man who looks right through me, and I say nothing. I say absolutely nothing because I'm too tired to fight and too scared to lose him and too ashamed to admit that the marriage expert's marriage is dying." That's when I understood the horrible irony. Patricia Henderson had saved 10,000 marriages by teaching people the exact skills she couldn't use in her own life. She was like a swimming instructor who'd forgotten how to swim, watching herself drown while everyone else made it to shore. The next few weeks were brutal. I watched her more carefully after that night, and once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. She had a client, young couple in their late 20s, fighting about household chores. Sounds trivial, right? But Dr. Henderson explained to them how those small daily neglects build up, how feeling unseen in the little things creates resentment in the big things. She drew them this whole diagram about bids for connection, how every time one partner makes a small attempt to connect and the other turns away, it damages the relationship foundation. And I'm sitting there watching her teach this, thinking, does she realize she's describing her own marriage? Does she hear herself? That same week, David came by the office again. But this time something was different. He seemed irritated, kept checking his watch while she finished up a session. When she finally came out, he didn't kiss her. Didn't even really look at her. Just said, "We need to talk tonight," and left. The way her face fell, God, it was like watching someone take a punch. She canceled her last 2 appointments that day. Just canceled them. Dr. Patricia Henderson, who'd never canceled an appointment in 15 years, who'd come to work with the flu, who'd done a session the day after her mother's funeral, canceled. And she asked me to drive her home because she said she didn't trust herself behind the wheel. The whole drive, she was silent. Just stared out the window like she was trying to memorize the world. And when we pulled up to her house, this beautiful craftsman in Queen Anne, all wood and warmth and windows, she turned to me and said, "I already know what he's going to say. I've heard this conversation 1,000 times in my office. I know every line. The script is always the same." She was right. David wanted a divorce. He'd apparently been seeing someone from his firm for 6 months. 6 months. While Patricia was teaching other couples how to rebuild after affairs, her own husband was having one. The universe has a sick sense of humor sometimes, doesn't it? But here's where it gets really twisted. He told her that she'd driven him to it. That her obsession with other people's marriages had destroyed theirs. That she'd become emotionally unavailable, that she gave everything to her clients and came home empty. And you want to know the worst part? She believed him. Dr. Patricia Henderson, who'd spent 2 decades helping people recognize emotional manipulation, who could spot narcissistic behavior from a mile away, who'd written actual papers on projection and blame shifting, believed him when he said his affair was her fault. I found out the next morning when she called me at 6 a.m. Her voice was flat, mechanical. She said, "I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the week, tell everyone there's a family emergency." And then she said, "Actually, tell them the truth. Tell them Dr. Henderson's getting divorced and needs time to process that she's a hypocrite." I didn't tell anyone that last part, obviously. But the guilt in her voice, the self-hatred, it made me physically sick. This woman had dedicated her entire adult life to helping people navigate the hardest parts of marriage, and now she was drowning in shame because hers didn't work out. She came back to the office 5 days later. Still took appointments. Still showed up for her clients with that same warmth and wisdom. But something fundamental had shifted. It was like watching someone perform surgery on themselves. She'd sit with couples having the exact same problems she had with David, and she'd guide them through with this perfect clinical distance, and then she'd go home to an empty house because David had moved out, and she'd sit in the dark wondering where she went wrong. I started staying late with her most nights. Not every night, but enough. We'd order takeout and talk, or sometimes we'd just sit in silence. And slowly, piece by piece, the real story started coming out. The story nobody saw because Patricia Henderson was too good at her job to let them see it. David hadn't just checked out recently. He'd been checking out for years. Ever since her practice really took off about 7 years ago. See, David had always been the successful one. The lawyer with the corner office and the impressive salary. And Patricia was the therapist with the little practice, helping people for modest fees. But then she published a book. Just a small book about communication in marriage, nothing fancy. Except it hit the right moment and suddenly everyone wanted to work with her. Her fees tripled, then quadrupled. She was getting invited to conferences, appearing on podcasts, building this reputation. And David hated it. He never said it directly, but it was there in everything he did. The comments about her getting too big for her britches. The way he'd minimize her success. How he'd schedule golf trips during her big speaking events. He was supposed to be her partner, but somewhere along the way, he'd decided to be her critic instead. But here's what really messed with my head. Patricia knew this. She'd known for years. She'd sit in her office and diagnose other people's relationship patterns and see clearly what was happening in her own marriage, and she still couldn't fix it. Because knowing what's wrong and being able to change it are two completely different things, especially when you're the one drowning. She told me about this concept she teaches her clients, called the pursuer-distancer dynamic. One partner pursues, seeking connection, and the other distances, pulling away. And the more one pursues, the more the other distances, until you're in this horrible dance where nobody wins. She'd been the pursuer with David for years. Coming home and trying to connect, asking about his day, suggesting date nights, initiating physical intimacy. And he'd been the distancer, giving her one-word answers, being too tired, always having something else to do. And the cruel joke, the absolute cruelty of it, is that in her office, she could teach the pursuer to stop pursuing and the distancer to step forward. She had a 92% success rate with this pattern. 92%. But in her own marriage, she couldn't stop pursuing because she was terrified of what would happen if she did. Terrified that if she stopped trying, there'd be nothing left at all. Turns out she was right. The moment she stopped pursuing, David found someone else. Someone who made him feel like the important one again. Someone who didn't spend her days solving everyone else's problems. Someone uncomplicated. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. And during those 4 months, I watched Patricia Henderson do something extraordinary and heartbreaking. She kept working. Kept showing up for her clients. Kept saving marriages while hers died in paperwork and legal fees. And the thing that destroyed me, absolutely destroyed me, is that she got even better at her job. There was this couple, the Rodriguezes, who came in about 2 months into Patricia's divorce. They'd been married 30 years and he'd had an affair and she'd found out and they were ready to burn it all down. Mrs. Rodriguez had this rage in her, this righteous fury, and she kept saying, "How am I supposed to forgive this? How does anyone forgive this?" And Patricia, fresh off her own husband's betrayal, sat with that rage and held it and validated it and then, very gently, very carefully, started asking the questions that mattered. Not should you forgive him. Not even can you forgive him. But do you want to? What would forgiveness even look like for you? What would you need from him to even consider it? And if you choose not to forgive, what does that path look like? She didn't push. Didn't tell Mrs. Rodriguez what to do. Just held space for every possibility. And over the next 6 weeks, I watched the Rodriguezes come back week after week, and Patricia guided them through the deepest pain of their lives with such grace, such wisdom, that by the end, they decided to stay together. Not because affairs are forgivable, but because they chose each other anyway. Because Patricia helped them see that betrayal doesn't have to be the end if both people are willing to do the work. And the day the Rodriguezes left her office for the last time, happy and holding hands and looking at each other like they were falling in love again, Patricia went into her office and cried for an hour because her own marriage was over and nobody had fought for her the way Mr. Rodriguez had fought for his wife. That's when I realized something that changed how I saw everything. Patricia Henderson wasn't a hypocrite. She wasn't failing at her own advice. She was just in a marriage with someone who didn't want to be saved. Because here's the truth about marriage counseling, the truth that nobody likes to admit. It only works when both people want it to work. Patricia could give you every tool, every technique, every insight into human connection, but if one person has already decided they're done, if one person has already checked out emotionally, no amount of wisdom can fix that. David didn't want to save their marriage. Maybe he hadn't wanted to for years. And Patricia, in all her expertise, couldn't save a marriage by herself. That's not how it works. It takes 2 people to build a relationship and only one to destroy it, but it takes both people to save it. The day the divorce was finalized, Patricia didn't come to work. I went to her house instead. Found her in her kitchen, surrounded by boxes because David had taken most of the furniture, sitting on the floor with a bottle of wine and looking more lost than I'd ever seen anyone look. And I sat down next to her and I didn't say anything because what do you say to someone who's just lost 18 years? Eventually, she started talking. Told me about their wedding day, how David had written his own vows and promised to always choose her. How they talked about growing old together, about retirement and grandkids and all those future things that now would never happen. She told me about their first apartment, tiny and perfect, where they'd been so broke but so happy. About the trips they'd taken, the dreams they'd shared, all the small moments that build a life. And then she said something that broke me. She said, "I know why I couldn't save my marriage. It's because I was trying to save the wrong person. I kept thinking if I just loved him better, if I just showed up more, if I just made him feel special enough, he'd love me back. But you can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken. And you can't make someone stay who's already decided to go." She paused, took a drink, and then she looked at me with these clear, sad eyes and said, "I've been teaching people for 20 years that love is a choice, that you wake up every day and choose your partner. But I forgot that they have to choose you back. David stopped choosing me a long time ago. And I was so busy trying to save us that I didn't notice I was the only one trying." That night, sitting on her kitchen floor, I watched Patricia Henderson finally grieve her marriage. Not as a therapist. Not as an expert. Just as a woman who'd loved someone and lost them and had to figure out how to keep breathing anyway. But here's where the story shifts. Because the ending isn't what you think it is. About a month after the divorce was final, something started changing in Patricia. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But slowly, like a flower opening. She stopped staying late at the office. Started taking Fridays off. Joined a book club. Started going to therapy herself, which she'd never done because she'd always thought she didn't need it. And in her sessions with clients, something deepened. There was this couple, the Parkers, who came in convinced they needed to divorce. They'd been together 12 years, had 2 kids, and they were just exhausted. Going through the motions. And in the old days, Patricia would have worked hard to save that marriage. Would have given them homework and communication techniques and all the tools she'd perfected over 20 years. But this time, she did something different. She asked them, "Do you want to save this marriage? Not should you, not do you think it's the right thing, but do you actually want to?" And then she sat in the silence while they looked at each other and realized they didn't know the answer. She started teaching them about acceptable endings. About how sometimes love runs its course and that doesn't make it a failure. How you can honor what you built together and still choose to build different things apart. And she told them about her own divorce. Not in detail, not inappropriately, but enough to let them know that she understood. That she'd been there. That ending a marriage didn't mean you'd failed at love, it just meant you'd loved and it hadn't been enough, and that was okay too. The Parkers ended up divorcing. But they did it with grace and respect, and they told Patricia that she'd given them permission to be honest, which saved them both from years of resentment. And Patricia came to understand that saving a marriage doesn't always mean keeping it together. Sometimes it means helping people end it well. Her practice shifted after that. She stopped being the marriage whisperer and became something deeper. Someone who helped people figure out what they actually wanted, not what they thought they should want. And ironically, paradoxically, her success rate went up. Because she wasn't trying to save every marriage anymore. She was trying to save the people in them. 6 months after her divorce, Patricia went on her first date. His name was Michael, he was a high school history teacher, and he was nothing like David. He was soft where David had been hard. Present where David had been absent. He'd been divorced too, had his own scars and his own wisdom, and when Patricia told him what she did for a living on their third date, he laughed and said, "That's either really good or really bad for us." But she liked that he said us. Like they were already a team. I met Michael about a month into their relationship when he came to pick Patricia up from work. He brought her coffee, just the way she liked it, and he asked me how my day was and actually listened to the answer. And when Patricia came out of her last session, tired but smiling, he hugged her. Just hugged her. Didn't ask about her day or need anything from her, just held her for a moment because he could tell she needed it. And I thought about David, who'd spent 18 years with this woman and never once thought to just hold her when she was tired. About how David had blamed her for his emptiness when really he was just empty on his own. About how David had needed her to fail so he could feel successful. And I realized that Patricia's divorce wasn't a failure. It was an escape. But Michael wasn't the happy ending. Or maybe he was part of it, but not all of it. The real transformation in Patricia came from somewhere else. About 8 months after the divorce, she did something wild. She took 3 months off. Just closed her practice, referred all her clients to other therapists, and disappeared. She went to Italy by herself. Rented a small apartment in Tuscany and spent 3 months doing nothing. Reading, walking, eating good food, staring at the sunset. She told me later that she needed to remember who she was when she wasn't fixing people. When she wasn't performing competence. When she was just Patricia, alone with her thoughts and her pain and her hope. She came back different. Lighter somehow. And she told me something that stayed with me ever since. She said, "I spent 20 years teaching people how to save their marriages, and I was really good at it. But I was teaching from theory, from research, from techniques. Now I'm teaching from experience. From failure. From loss. And that makes me a better therapist because I'm not afraid anymore of not having all the answers." She reopened her practice but changed her approach completely. She still helped couples, but she also started specializing in helping individuals in dying marriages figure out what they wanted. She created workshops about acceptable endings and conscious uncoupling and how to divorce with dignity. She wrote a second book, this one about her own divorce, and it was raw and honest, and it made her first book look like amateur work. The book caused a scandal in her field. Other therapists thought she was being unprofessional. Clients worried it meant she wasn't good at her job. But something unexpected happened. Her practice exploded. Because people were tired of experts who pretended to be perfect. They wanted someone who'd been in the trenches. Someone who understood that sometimes your best isn't enough, and that's not a failure, that's just life. Patricia started getting requests for speaking engagements about therapeutic failure and professional vulnerability. She talked openly about her divorce, about how she'd felt like a fraud, about how she'd learned more from her marriage ending than she had from 20 years of study. And people connected with her in ways they never had before. I remember one conference where she gave a keynote speech. She stood up there in front of 500 therapists and said, "We need to stop pretending we have it all figured out. We need to stop acting like we're immune to the problems we help others solve. I'm a marriage counselor and I got divorced. That doesn't make me bad at my job. It makes me human. And maybe that's what our clients need most. Not perfection, but humanity." She got a standing ovation. Not because she'd saved 10,000 marriages. But because she'd admitted that she couldn't save her own and kept going anyway. Now, 3 years later, Patricia's practice is more successful than ever. She's still with Michael, and they're taking it slow because she's learned that rushing into forever doesn't work. She still has hard days where she misses David, or more accurately, misses who she thought David was. She still feels that sharp pain sometimes when she sees old photos or hears their song or drives past places they used to go. But she's also free in a way she never was before. Free to be imperfect. Free to not have all the answers. Free to tell her clients that sometimes love isn't enough, and that's a tragedy, but it's also just reality. She teaches them that you can do everything right and still lose. That you can be an expert in relationships and still fail at your own. That wisdom doesn't make you immune to pain, it just helps you navigate it better. Last week, I sat in on one of her sessions. Young couple, just married, fighting about money. And Patricia listened to them with such patience, such compassion. And then she said, "I'm going to teach you some tools that will help you communicate better about this. But I also want you to know that these tools are only useful if you both use them. Marriage is a two-person job. One person can't carry it alone, no matter how hard they try. Believe me, I know." The couple looked at each other with this recognition, this understanding, and I could see them both deciding, right there in that moment, to try. To actually try together instead of alone. And I realized that Patricia Henderson did save her marriage. Just not in the way anyone expected. She saved herself from a marriage that was slowly killing her. She saved herself from the lie that she could fix everything if she just tried hard enough. She saved herself from the shame of being human. So here's what I learned from watching Patricia Henderson's life fall apart and come back together. The people who help others aren't saints. They're just people who've decided to use their pain for something other than destruction. Patricia spent 10,000 hours helping other people save their marriages, and when her own marriage died, she could have quit. Could have decided she was a fraud. Could have let the shame eat her alive. Instead, she let the failure teach her. She let the pain crack her open into something more honest. She stopped trying to be the expert who had all the answers and became the guide who'd walked through the fire and knew the way out. And now, when someone sits in her office devastated because their marriage is ending, she can look them in the eye and say, "I know it feels like the end of the world. It did for me too. But you're going to survive this. You're going to come out the other side different, maybe broken in places, but also stronger. More real. More you." That's worth more than 10,000 saved marriages. That's wisdom you can only get from loss. There's a photo in Patricia's office now, new one she put up last year. It's her standing alone on a beach in Italy during her 3 months away. She's looking at the ocean and the light is hitting her just right and she looks peaceful. Really, truly peaceful. And underneath it, she's written a quote that she tells her clients when they're ready to hear it. The quote says, "You cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved, but you can always save yourself." That's the story of Dr. Patricia Henderson, the marriage counselor who saved 10,000 marriages but couldn't save her own. Except she did save something. She saved herself. And sometimes, that's the only marriage that really matters. Before you go, before you click away and the real world rushes back in, I have a request. A genuine one. If you're still here with me, if you made it through this entire story, through the unraveling of a love that was supposed to be textbook, through the quiet agony of Patricia's realization, then you and I have shared something. For these last few minutes, we've inhabited the same emotional space. And I want to bridge that digital gap, to make this feel less like a broadcast and more like a conversation in a dimly lit room, long after everyone else has gone home. So, tell me. In the comments below, I want you to leave a little mark. A digital postcard. I don't just want to know you're there, I want to know where there is. Where in the world are you, sitting with this story? Are you in a sun-drenched apartment in Sydney, the morning light casting long shadows across your floor? Or is it a rainy, hushed evening in London, the city lights smearing like watercolors against your window? Maybe you're on a lunch break in a Toronto skyscraper, the world buzzing below you, or curled up on a couch in a quiet suburban home in Ohio, the only light coming from your screen. Tell me your location and the time right now. Not just for geography, but for context. I want to feel the tapestry of time zones we're spanning. I want to picture you in your specific corner of the world, maybe with a cooling cup of coffee, maybe with the weight of your own day on your shoulders, watching this. Are you thinking about your own relationships? The ones that bloomed and the ones that fractured. The pain you've carried, the quiet sacrifices, the journeys you've taken that look nothing like the map you were given. This story was about Patricia, but the second it lands in your ears, it becomes about you. It has to. And if this story hit you somewhere deep, if it didn't just pass through you as content, but actually lodged itself in your chest, if it made you feel the cold dread of recognition, or the warm relief of being understood, or the sharp clarity of a truth you've been avoiding, then I'm asking you to hit that like button. But let's be perfectly clear. Do not do it for the algorithm. Do it for the human on the other side of this screen. Do it as a silent signal. A nod in the dark. A way of saying, this resonated. This mattered. Because Patricia's story, this story of a love that couldn't be saved by any rulebook, matters. It matters because it's real. And in acknowledging hers, you are, in a small but significant way, acknowledging the validity of your own. Your story, with all its messy, beautiful, painful twists, matters too. That button, in this context, isn't a metric, it's a testament. If you want to continue this journey, to explore more of these raw, unvarnished truths about the human condition, then please, subscribe. This channel is dedicated to pulling back the curtain on the mess of being human. We're not here for easy answers, we're here for real ones. And the next story I'm telling, it's one that still haunts me. It's about a prosecutor, a man who built his entire identity and career on putting dangerous criminals away for 15 years, only to discover a secret that shattered his world. His own father was one of them. The moral and emotional labyrinth he had to walk is something you truly will not want to miss. But for now, just sit with this. Don't rush to the next video. Don't immediately fill the silence. Sit with the uncomfortable, liberating idea that the experts, the therapists, the authors, the gurus, they don't have it all figured out. That true, hard-won wisdom doesn't just come from soaring successes, but is often forged in the fires of our most profound failures. Sit with the notion that sometimes, the very bravest, most strength-requiring thing you can possibly do is to look at something you've poured your soul into, admit with a trembling voice that you cannot save it, and find the courage to walk away anyway. To choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. Patricia Henderson, in her quiet devastation and her ultimate resilience, taught me that. It was a lesson written in the spaces between her words, in the quiet acceptance of her new reality. She taught me that walking away from a sinking ship isn't abandonment, it's how you ensure you don't drown with it. And now, I am teaching it to you. Passing it on, like a story told around a fire, hoping it provides you with a little warmth, a little light for your own path. Thank you for watching. Truly. Thank you for being here, for your time, and for your attention, which is the most valuable currency any of us have. And please, always remember this final thought, let it be your anchor: you can't save everyone. You can't love someone into loving themselves. You can't reason someone out of their own destruction. That burden was never yours to carry. But you can always, always save yourself. And that is not just an act of self-preservation, it is your greatest and most sacred responsibility.